Today I want to talk about why vegan launch would be of special interest to millennials and Zoomers. Because unfortunately, you guys have a lot on your plate these days. Now, I'm going to be 61 in about a week. And when I was 10, that was the first Earth Day, and that was the first real awareness in my world that things were not all so great, and that the adults were kind of out to lunch when it came to taking care of the planet, that they just kind of let it go to hell. Now, that was 50 years ago, so this is a really unfortunate. It was really unfortunate then, and it's unfortunate that that did not become the dominant goal of the economy, taking care of the most vital things to human existence: food, shelter, water, air, ecosystems. And ecosystems are, of course, center to that. And instead, what we've done is we focused on luxury goods. And of course, eating animals is a luxury that goes back to the kings. Of course, as a vegan, we see it as something more profound than even that. And so supplying animal foods to the wealthiest countries has destroyed global ecology in a way that I couldn't even imagine back in 1970. And so now all the problems that I've been working on my whole life are in, even though there's been a kind of progress and an awareness, but the pace has not been keeping up. So while we're having growth of solutions, the problems are growing at a faster rate. Now, this is actually to be expected. This is not necessarily a reason to give up hope, but it is a reason to use new and better methods. So one of the challenges that you have as a person of now, my generation, I started my first environmental business at age 23, is that sometimes it feels like, well, we're waiting for boomers like me to get off the dime and do something. Because if you look at politics and finance, it's really heavily dominated by boomers. So, my two sons have convinced me that I'm a boomer, but we'll call it boomer plus, because I've really never given up that frustration about not being able to execute at scale that I had when I started my first environmental business at age 23. So a lot has changed, and a lot has changed that is beneficial to you now. And one of the main things that's changed is that vegans, millennial and Gen Z vegans are the largest vegan constituency on the planet. So that means that you have the most people, you might say, in your demographic. But the challenge is that most of the political power and seemingly most of the money is in the hands of boomers. But I'm here to tell you that when it comes to financial capability, millennials and Zoomers have as much money in terms of investable capital as a group, as the top third, as the boomers. Now, you might find that hard to believe, but I'm just telling you that's the case. And in the next few days, we'll be posting some information on the website to help you see that more clearly. Now, the challenge that you have in taking action financially is that for the past 86 years, most of the Western culture's financial laws prohibited anybody but the most wealthy from participating in deciding what companies would be funded. And so that's how those that had wealth already perpetuated the culture of destruction that we have now. Because I was not the only one that wanted to make changes. And I have a lot of stories. I don't want to digress too much just yet, this early on in this video, if at all. But it wasn't like there were a lot of people trying, but we just couldn't get our grips on the finances to get to scale. With something called Title III in the US, which I probably will talk about in every video, we now have the capability of organizing essentially grassroots finance. And so my goal for Vegan Launch is to build a community of 10,000 people. And most of those people, I'm not saying no boomers allowed. That would be kind of, not to our advantage. And it turns out that people in their 60s are going vegan at a pretty high rate, probably because they wised up and also they realized that it's essential for their own health. Maybe the ones that aren't vegan, I don't know. Let me not go too far down that path. That's the third biggest demographic, actually. People over their 60s is a big demographic as well. So we don't want to in any way keep them out of the community, but really, this is your world. And I really built Vegan Lunch in a way for my original self. Back when I was starting my very first company, it was called Energy Saving Equipment Company. And we sold water-saving shower heads, and I sold thousands of them. And then energy-efficient lighting started to make an entry. And I had a friend who was fighting nuclear power plants, and back then there were these things called watt misers. All they were just dimmer lights. They saved about 2% of the energy over regular light bulbs. And he said just that one technology would save enough energy to displace all the energy that they'd ever hoped to produce by building nuclear power plants. Now it's crazy. With LED lighting, the energy efficiency in the lighting sector is huge. And even so, conservation is rarely discussed as a strategy for ending climate change or reversing at least reversing the industrial and commercial aspects of carbon production. But it's hugely significant, and we can move much faster with conservation than even through renewable energy. So I knew that back in the 80s and was trying to get to scale and was constantly being foiled by not understanding financial laws, not understanding how banks worked. Just, I could see that businesses happened, but there was I couldn't get mentoring. And so, okay, here's one of my favorite stories. So I talked to my dad, who was an engineer and didn't know a whole lot about finance, but he said, well, talk to my friend Joe. He's wealthy and he's in business for himself. He makes a lot of money, and maybe he can be your mentor. And also, meanwhile, it wasn't like I wasn't trying. I went to the business school in St. Louis, Washington University. I talked to the dean of the business school. He gave me some books about how to sell. I mean, really, it was hard for an environmentally minded person to find a mentor, much less any capital. And I did the best I could. So I talked to Joe. I'll leave his last name out to spare the family. So Joe and I met, and Joe said, well, Mark, I don't have a whole lot to advise you. I just sell what people like, what a lot of. A lot of people want cigarettes and candy, and I sell cigarettes and candy. And back then I'm thinking, oh my God, what could I learn from a guy like that? And I kind of just said, well, thanks for your time, and I left. Later, I realized there was a lot of wisdom in that, right? If you want to change the world, you still have to get a lot of people to move. And now your generation wants a lot of change. And one thing that can be done is develop investment products to launch the kind of companies that either you want to fund or that you even might want to be the founder of. And so there's a lot of demand now for companies that are going to solve the world's problems. And I believe that most of them will be founded and led by vegan entrepreneurs, because giving animals their rights is one of the easiest and most direct steps we can take to solve climate change among a huge range of problems. This is why I shifted from being a pure environmentalist to focusing on the vegan economy, because to me it's at the center of all that. So with these new Title III laws, now as a group, Millennials and Zoomers can invest $100 into new companies. And that may seem kind of trivial, but if you think about it, as I've said also in many places, Uber was started with only $200,000. So 1,000 people getting together and putting $200 into a project, and you can start something as big as Uber, which is now valued at over $80 billion on the public stock market 10 years later. That's how things start. And now, because of these new laws, we can come together as a constituency and start deciding what projects to launch and grow. It's really that easy, but the thing is, we need to get a lot of people working together. And that's something I really admire about the younger generation. How can I say this without sounding like an idiot boomer? But anyway, what the hell? You folks understand technology, like the internet didn't even boot up until I was 35. So, for me, it's just been playing catch up the whole time. And as you can see, I'm just keeping my nose above the waterline here. But I've built something. You see, the thing is that without the time I put in to learn finance, you might not ever figure this out. And the current methods of financing the vegan economy and the climate change economy are very restrictive. They're very reliant on that boomer money only. And I'm saying, no, just like when I was young, you know the right path. You know what's needed, and you want to take action. And so Vegan Launch, in a way, is my gift to my former self, and by extension to you, anybody age 20 to 40 that wants to start a company or work together with other $100, $200 at a time investors to decide what projects get funded. This is the platform for you. And I hope you'll take up that idea. We're making participation super easy. The basic participation in the platform is free. We'll have training for people that want to become more skilled as investors, even mentors, and then what I call citizen financiers. We're going to need to move so much money around in the world from old line industries into this new generation of businesses and approaches. And to accelerate the speed, we just can't wait for older generations to make these decisions. And just for some background, for some understanding of how things have evolved, a lot of people think, well, it's charities and politics need to do this work. This is a huge mistake. It's always been a huge mistake to rely on charities and government to solve these most important problems, because, as we've said in the earlier videos, like how to get big things done, if we could imagine these problems solved, those would be the icons of our economy. And if we look at the icons of our economy today, they solve problems that mattered decades ago, even a century ago now. Companies like Ford or General Electric, they're ancient in terms of their thinking, and their approach to problems is really constrained by their inability to shed this historic dependency on a whole way of doing things. It's utterly invalid given what the rate at which we have to change. Now, of course, I'd love to help bring them along, but all of those old line companies are sitting on basically stranded capital. They've invested trillions of dollars in stuff that's totally worthless, like producing internal combustion engine cars. That is of total worthlessness, and yet trillions of dollars have been invested in that infrastructure. How they're going to come out of this and their shareholders, it's a mystery. Very few will actually survive this iteration if things go well for us and the planet. The other option is things go terrible for us and the planet, and they also don't survive, right? There's no real positive path except to really re-envision and rebuild as fast as possible and use whatever spare parts we can from the existing economy. There's just no other real path forward. We really need to move into the ecological and technological future, and of course, the center of that is animal rights is got to be the guiding principle in all of our economic decisions going forward if we want to have a hope. That's why I do this. And of course, I don't want to use the word hope so broadly because, I could die tomorrow. The world has its own intelligence. You have your own intelligence. People will keep being creative. So better to say this is a very fun approach and one that brings power down to the level of the first-time entrepreneur and the first-time investor in your 20s or 30s. You get to make the decisions that will cast the future. You don't need to wait for the politicians to agree. You don't need to wait for the wealthy investors to agree. And in fact, my experience in working with very wealthy people is they don't want to be the first on board. So to the extent that we can work together as a community and collectivize our finances in this way, we'll get them to move because they just don't want to be on the first line of risk. And starting companies is risky. That's not really going to change. We're doing everything we can to de-risk those companies. So let's take a brief look at the history. of how we got, why things are like this, and what we're doing to change that. So first came the environmental charities, and with environmental charities, you're going to have big donors, like people like the Rockefellers did a lot of environmental philanthropy. But what does that mean? It means first, get rich doing something. In the case of the Rockefellers, they got rich in the oil economy. And maybe in some tangential way, you could say the oil economy helped save the whales because oil replaced whale blubber as a fuel. So it can, in one odd way, contributed, but now it's every bit, more serious problem. And this is sometimes things work in that way. But the main point is they made their money in oil and then did the charity on the environment. And then much later, when I was working on the environmental charity in Washington, D.C. in the 90s, this odd event happened. Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel, his net worth grew into the billions, and around age 70, he said, some very well-known environmentalist, a guy named E.O. Wilson, who I was friends with at the time, he was constantly in Moore's ear saying, look, you need to set up a charity to protect biodiversity is the most important thing. So they set up the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation for Biodiversity. I think they put something like $2 billion in there. And I was part of a group of people who it's like, hey, that's great, but the foundation only spends 5% of its money a year on actually doing good. The big part of the money is in some portfolio. And where's all that money going? And the answer to that was, look, don't ask where our finances are. Our job is to make money and then give it in the charity, but don't look under the hood. And it's like, that was already a pretty gross idea by that time. It's like, why not invest the $2 billion directly into ecologically beneficial projects as well as donate? So a real lack of creativity, sadly, even at that moment, not that long ago, when the green economy had already emerged to the level where that money could easily have been invested in growth projects aligned with the charity's values. So what does this mean in terms of timing? It's like, well, wait for somebody to get rich doing something uncorrelated, then they start a charity, then that charity gives away 5% of the money, and meanwhile, the bulk of the money, which is in the holding, in the pool that's meant for perpetuity, is invested in things that are, well, almost by definition, counter to the interests of the charity. So that's really been the state of affairs for the environmental movement since the Rockefellers. So over 100 years now of this kind of unfortunate disalignment and waiting for somebody to both get rich and pick up a cause. That's a super slow way to solve problems. So now let's look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the new generation problem solver, and he got super rich, rich enough, actually. To be honest, he wasn't as rich as Gordon Moore by any stretch. He only made it, about $180 million. So in a way, he was kind of a small fry, but he was very young, and he felt like that was enough money to go direct into a business that was directly aligned with solving climate change, rather than waiting, making more money. But he knew in college that he had to make money first before he could start a business that directly addressed the issue. And now you can see Tesla is scaling like mad. So he was definitely on the right track. But what was missing from that equation was the ability for him to start immediately. So he had to do some diversionary business to acquire the money. It accelerated things a lot. But again, how many of us are going to go make roughly, say, even 200 million first and then launch the company that's going to change the world? And even if we could, it's a waste of time, in my opinion. Because why? Because again, vegans hold $2 trillion right now of investment capital. So much more efficient way is what I'm proposing. I propose that we bring ourselves together in the community, the vegan launch investment community, and we learn finance together. We get good at it, and we have the money in aggregate as a large demographic constituency to launch projects to aggregate tens of millions of dollars, which is a small amount in the world of finance. We have that capacity as long as we can build agreement. So really what we're learning at Vegan Launch is as vegans, how to build this agreement with each other, then how to invest really small, low-risk amounts that are appropriate for whatever level a person is in the financial pecking order. I mean, the trend is if you're acquiring wealth, you get more as you get older. So that means the younger generations that have less can invest more broadly, design projects, get them booted up as they become more and more understood by boomers, right? We get a few boomers to understand what the heck you're doing, and then they can invest as well in larger amounts. And then we have a real snowball effect without having to take that diversion, either the charity diversion or even the Elon Musk version, or even a lot of the people I know in the field, they got wealthy in, again, some derivative field. Not derivative, that's not the right word, just a different field. Some were bankers, some were entrepreneurs. They made money, now they're venture capitalists, which is great. I applaud that, right? Every time a person goes vegan, every dollar that moves into the field is good, but it's still a delayed way of thinking that now with your generation, you've woken up. It's like, what? Should I now follow some career path to get money so I can give to charity later or start a company later? And, well, I was against that from day one. That's why my very first activity, I left college. There were no environmental studies programs or anything correlated to what I was trying to do. I just winged it, but I was 23 because I didn't want to wait. And now I'm taking that I don't want to wait attitude, and I've kind of built a platform for you guys with our growing team so you don't have to wait. That's really what I'm saying. You don't have to wait for the politicians. You don't have to wait for the venture capital firms. You don't have to wait for the big financial players. We can sit together, in our virtual community, and ideally soon back face to face in real life, and work together and make decisions for our communities, for our countries, and for any kind of level of decision we want to handle to, again, bring a new level of animal rights, bring the level we all want, which is complete rights to animals. And doing that will bring rights to human beings, will end the scarcity, the food scarcity that's caused by the animal industry, will improve people's lives in so many ways. And we get to start now. We don't have to wait. So if you've watched all the way to here, thank you very much. Please leave any questions you have below, and I'll answer those in the next videos. Thanks again. I'll talk to you later.